Okay, so thanks everyone for coming. It's a real pleasure to have Marta Scaglioni here from Italy, who currently holds a research position at the University of Milan-Bicocca, and is doing her PhD in Germany at the University of Bayreuth. And her research, funded by a European Research Council grant, Shadows of Slavery in West Africa and Beyond, an historical anthropology, tackles slavery and its heritage in Tunisia. And this is some of the research she's going to share with us today regarding Blacks' rights and activists and communities of slave descendants. And I would also encourage everyone to look up the SWAB, or Slavery, Shadows of Slavery in West Africa website. And it includes resources, interviews with scholars, and other information about the researchers associated with the project. So Marta is going to speak for about 40 minutes. And then we'll have lots of time for questions and answers. And given that we're an intimate crowd, everyone will have their chance. So Marta.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I'm going to speak about Black Tunisians and Black rights activism after 2011. And I will start from an article which appeared in 2015 on the Huffington Post Maghreb in February, which was portraying this southern community, like the border between Tunisia and Libya, describing this community as very poor, without infrastructure, without like high schools, hospital, and so on. And this community, inhabitants of these communities are racialized as Black. So they are called Abid Buntun. Abid stands in Arabic for slave. And they are living next to the white lineage counterpart, which is the Buntun. So they are called like slave of the Buntun, of the people who are living like next to them, after like a small dried up river. And this article is focusing on the marriage of a Black Urbuntni with a white Urbuntnia. The intermarriages between the two communities are completely forbidden. And these people, this couple met while shepherding on this river. They fell in love. She decided to escape her lineage. So she went to the Black community. They got married without her parents' consent. And she is now living in the Black community without like visiting her parents any longer. Her parents are not visiting her and their offspring any longer. So these activists soon dubbed this story the Black Romeo and the White Juliet. We will refer to that like from now on like that. And they organized a march, which was organized for the International Day Against Racial Discrimination on the 21st of March 2015. And in that period, you have to think that there was also the World Social Forum going on in Tunisia. So like there was a debate on human rights, on racism, racial discrimination, and so on. So they took their buses. They started from Tunis. Tunis is in the north, this community is in the south. They took their buses, they went down, and they organized a conference in a city hall in the white part. But the Abid Buntun didn't go to the conference, didn't show up. And they even said, what do these people want? We don't understand. There is no racism in our community. So from this like incident, I developed my whole doctoral thesis, meaning that there is a divide between the Black rights activism, which thrived after 2011, and the history of slavery in Tunisia. There is like an unbridgeable gap, which mainly rests on racial thinking, on the difference in racial thinking. And I will try to like unravel all these things along my presentation. I will first sketch out briefly the Black rights activism. Can you hear? No. Okay. I will first try to sketch out the Black rights activism, and then I will move to the history of slavery in Tunisia and mainly the post-abolition trajectories of freed slaves, so slave descendants, which are really like the focus of the reason for the divide mainly in my argument. And my argument this is like my thesis argument, is that this like embryonic yet sustained political activism after 2011 purport an idea that Black Tunisians are a category which is homogeneous, mainly because they created this category along phenotypical coordinates, meaning like the skin color. So they lumped all these actors together in a category, mainly overlooking all the histories of slavery and all the histories of these people, of these Black actors, because you have to think that it's not just about activists in the North and slave descendants in the South, but there are Black refugees from 2011 Libya, for example, students coming from West Africa, profiting from a system of scholarship between West Africa and Tunisia. So it's very like heterogeneous. I will move to this is El Gospa. This is the, it's a very poor community in the South. There are no infrastructure. This article is right. This is a white of Buntun and an Abid of Buntun. These are two girls, just to show you the like visual difference. So post-2011 Black strike activism, first of all, we have to think that Black Tunisians make up 10–15% of Tunisian population, which is a very high percentage if you think that the percentage of people identifying themselves as Blacks in the US is lower. But they were never counted like statistically, so they were never addressed by the INS, which is the Institut National de la Statistique in Tunisia, mainly because Tunisia experienced a phase after the independence, so in 1956, when there was a nation building process by the two presidents between 1956 and 2011, so Habib Bourguiba and Zine El Abidine Ben Ali. And these two presidents tried to create the nation along very homogeneous coordinates. So they were homogenizing their society. And like speaking about minorities was a taboo. I mean, not only ethnic minorities, because we also have religious minorities, because there is a very big Jewish community. Linguistic minorities, there are Berbers, for example, so Berber speakers. And also counting people, counting diversity means somehow creating it and also inoculating it with some political meaning. And this is like seditious, so it was completely forbidden. This official policy of denial of minorities went along with two processes. One is the process of allochtonization of Black people. So Black people were perceived as exogenous, so coming from the outside, meaning coming from the history of slavery. And in parallel, the autochthonization of whites. So the whites were the people of the country who were like created as the population of Tunisia. And however, we know that Black Tunisians now, but also like in the post-independence process, they suffer from social and economical discrimination and also verbal and physical assaults. Mainly they are addressed with words like wasif, which means servant, or kahlouche, which means blackie. I don't know if you're familiar with the kohl, the eyeliner. So it stems from the same root, kahlouche, kohl. But then there are also like very painful insults like girda, mankey, or mumassakh, dirty. Of course, I'm speaking about Black and whites, but they are social and cultural constructions. This is like without saying, you see that like these people, they are kind of like distinguishable, but they are not, sometimes it's like things are way more blurred. So we are just relying on the local understandings of colors. And so usually like colors, like skin colors is always like a social and cultural construction, like an historical process led to the distinguishing colors. So Black strike activism, already before 2011, some articles and some debates were spreading, like in civil society, but it was forbidden. So they had to be careful. The associations were forbidden, so there were no associations. And then in 2011, as you know, the so-called Arab Spring broke out, and we are speaking about the epicenter of the Arab Spring because Mohamed Bouazizi self-immolated himself in the southern part of Tunisia, and everything started from that. Of course, things were boiling, but that was triggering the revolution. So Tunisia dismantled a system which was very corrupted, which was relying on a very brutal secret service. And this system was also like supporting a very corrupted elite. So everything was dismantled. And one of the first things to be done was started speaking about this cultural homogeneous myth, all this cultural monolithic nature, which were myths. So they were first questioned and then like addressed and then like debated in the public sphere, like in the media, in articles. So there are many articles which appeared before. But I think we can start with the first association, which was ADAM, was established in 2012. So the first association which had in its manifesto the fight against racial discrimination. ADAM means, of course, like referring to the first man, like all men are equal. And I think the biggest achievement of ADAM, which was later dismantled and then reorganized, is like the sole acknowledgement of a minority. So for the first time, people were saying there is a Black minority. I'm quoting one of the activists, even saying those are Blacks was considered a blasphemy. But then calling them wasif among whites was something common. In 2005, already like slightly before, there was an article appeared on the internet, and it was speaking about like accusing Tunisians to be racist. 2005 is not by chance, because in 2005 there were some uprisings in the south, which didn't lead to the revolution, but which were already like contesting unemployment, poverty, and also racial discrimination. Because the south is the place, like the part of Tunisia where Black people, the presence of Black people is higher and more visible. And this is connected to the history of slavery and to the employment of Black people and slaves in oases. So in the production of dates mainly, or like in really like labor intensive jobs like the irrigation and so on. So if we want to outline a profile of the activists, it's really interesting because they are all women, Black women. They are well educated, originally coming from the south, but residing in Tunis. So mainly their families were coming from the south, but they grew up in Tunis or in the coast, in the Sahel. And the presence of women is interesting because it's connected to the fact that Habib Bourguiba, the first president of Tunisia, was mobilizing the civil society a lot in order to control it, which is called Bourguibism, the policy of Bourguibism. And he was also mobilizing women a lot. So he's called El Muharrir El Mara, the liberator of women. I don't know if you know, but the Code du Statut Personnel, so some laws promulgated by Habib Bourguiba were given women rights even before some European countries. So abortion, divorce, contraception pills, all these things came before Italy, for example. So he was really the president of women. He was like a mobilizer of women. So these activists come from this kind of tradition. There is like a line. What they are asking is the recognition of full citizenship rights, meaning they assume that Black people are completely homogeneous with white people, meaning they have the same religion, they speak the same language, they have the same culture, but they suffer from a kind of institutionalized racism and discrimination, meaning less access to jobs, less access to education. So they are mainly asking for empowerment rights. And this is interesting because the first thing the parliament did was to, so the Constituent Assembly said, okay, you want something to enhance Blacks' rights? Let's do some minority protection laws. And they scornfully rejected it. Like, we are not a minority. We are completely homogeneous. We want some empowerment policies. And we want the introduction of a hate crime. So a law punishing racist acts and verbal insults and so on. They put a lot of importance on education. So mainly their job is to go to school and to teach what racism is. So I'm quoting one of the leading figure of this activism, which is Sadia Mosbah, that's her, which she is now the leading figure of NEMTI, which is the second organization which was reorganized from ADAM, from the dismantlement of ADAM. And this is like a quote. I go to primary school to teach children what racism is. Once I asked them about colors, how many colors are there? And they told me Ahmar, red, Akhdar, green, Azrak, blue, and Wasif, which means servant. So servant kind of experienced a semantical turn and began to address the color by meaning like by implying a like inferior social position and inferior professional position. MNEMT, which is the biggest association up to now, claims to be apolitical, meaning that they don't want any representation in the parliament. It's before 2011, there were no black deputy, no black minister, no black Tunisian in the parliament. After 2011, there was the Constituent Assembly, which is the assembly in charge of writing down the constitution. And there was just one black deputy, who is Bashir Shamam. And Bashir Shamam was elected with the Islamist party of Ennahda. In 2014, many black deputies were elected in the parliament, all with the Islamist party of Ennahda. So all black people elected in the parliament are elected with the Islamists. And this is a problem because they never speak overtly about racism. They are not campaigning for blacks' rights. They like represent the presence of black people, but not their stances. And these activists like Sadia Musbah, Maha Abdelhamid, like Adam Mnemti, they have a very secular upbringing. So they are completely rejecting these deputies. And that's why they still don't find an agreement over a law to be introduced or like some policies for the enhancement of blacks' rights. Everything is stuck now. So one of the biggest outcomes of blacks' rights is the creation of the category of blacks' rights. However, in order, like the main goal of these activists was the recruitment of resources and people in a very short period of time. So they tried to, they had to be very inclusive. So they decided to include people by means of their skin color. So they lumped all together these activists, these people saying, you're black Tunisians. So let's create a category of black Tunisians and then move on. And they never questioned the fact that that this category is more heterogeneous than that. And the other consequence is that lumping people by means of their skin color means referring to a racial framework, which is the North Atlantic one. So they are really distancing themselves from the racial framework coming from the history of slavery in Tunisia, which is connected to the Islamic slavery. So they are referring to activists in North America, concepts in South Africa. MNEMT means my dream. So it recalls an activism a la Martin Luther King. And when they saw this couple in the South, this Black Romeo and White Juliet, they organized a march calling against apartheid. So that they applied immediately the category of apartheid to a situation which is not the same geographically, so it's not South Africa, temporally, so it's not pre-1994 South Africa, and also it's not the same kind of prohibition of intermarriages. And that's what I want to tackle today, to explain you the divide between the two categories, between the two groups of actors. I want to enter in the situation of the prohibition of intermarriages, which is, I think it's more interesting also for your research in general. So if we want to explain racial issues in Tunisia, we have to refer to the framework of Islamic slavery, Islamic black slavery, because we have here we have had two kinds of slavery. So the white, more elite slavery and the black slavery, so coming from the trans-Saharan slave trade. You may know something, I mean, I'm not really going deeper into it, but it's people are enslaved because they are enslaved because they're born into slavery, or if they are captured, and there are many other tribute and so on. But the biggest point is the prohibition of enslavement of Muslims, so fellow Muslims. However, it has happened, we know it. So when Islam spread in West Africa, the great jihads were enslaving Muslims, and this impasse was bypassed by the reference to a racial thinking. So the crystallization of blackness as something enslavable. So the overlapping of blackness and enslavability, which was crystallized in the 17th century, but has deeper historical roots. I'm here referring to Hall's theories. But Islamic slavery has some kind of features which distinguish it from the North Atlantic or the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. So the main point here, the main interesting point is that Islamic slavery led to a very high degree of métissage, of interracial mingling of people, black and white, mainly because of two things. The first is the institution of concubinage. The second is the patrilineal system. And also and a third is the encouragement of manumission by the holy texts. So you know, concubinage is completely sanctioned by the Quran. It's already, I think it's the Quran, it's not the Hadith, I have to check. Anyway, like the prophets say, if you don't find any case, the pious woman, then take one your right hand possess, meaning like take a concubine. And the concubine enjoyed a series of rights, which were very specific. So if she gave birth to a child, to her master, the child was considered completely free, because there is a very strict patrilineal system. So if the father is free, the child is free. Then she acquired the status of Walad, meaning that she was not, she could not have, like he cannot be sold, he cannot sell her, sorry. He could not sell her. And she was usually freed at the death of the master. So death bed manumissions and all these things are very common in Tunisian society, and like in Islamic slavery in general. So the thing is that here we have the injection of black people into the host society, which is free and considered as white, through manumissions and concubines' children. So the degree of métissage is very high, and you see it when you walk down the street in Tunis. There is a lot of there are a lot of nuances between black and white, and it's very difficult to tell who is white and who is black. And this is very different from the North Atlantic system of like like the hierarchization of humanity in North Africa and in South Africa. Another institution which has to be explained before moving to the way the Abid d'Orbunton get married is the Kafa, which is a pre-Islamic institution and sanctions the equality of birth and social status in marriage, meaning that it's discouraged to get married below one's status, but also piety, character, wealth, profession, religion, freedom, and descent. But it's an institution which is usually applied to women more than to men, meaning that it tries to discourage daughters to dishonor their families by getting married downwards somehow. So the outcome is that the marriage between a black man and a white woman is almost non-extant. It's very difficult to find. So the woman usually doesn't get married downwards to in terms of race, but the man acquiring a concubine can, like under certain circumstances can. Now I will just go to the post-slavery trajectories in southern Tunisia, because they are useful to understand the position of Abid d'Orbunton and the difference with the black Tunisians in the north. You may know that Tunisia abolished slavery very early in 1846. It was the first country in the Ottoman Empire and in the whole Muslim world. And it did so. It was a very far-seeing policy by Ahmed Bey, the Bey of Tunis at that time, in order to avoid a Western intervention. So France and Italy and Great Britain at that time were invading African countries. So in 1830, Algeria was conquered. And one of the justifications was these countries and these governments are so primitive because they still perpetrate slavery institutions. So Ahmed Bey understood very quickly that in order to avoid the colonization, he had to abolish slavery. But anyway, Tunisia was colonized, so it was not so successful. And once slavery was abolished, freed slaves follow very different trajectories, depending on geographical, but also like social and like the situation of the household. For example, the Bey slaves were freed and then like hired with a salary directly. But mainly there was also a situation of like economic retrenchment at that time. So many households were not able to re-employ their slaves. So freed slaves in the big cities especially ended up with like in prostitution, peddling, begging, homelessness, and so on. In the South, however, so slave owners were very reluctant. They opposed a very fierce resistance to the base decree. And mainly because of course, they gave like a religious justification saying that slavery is sanctioned in the Quran, so to forbid what God permits is like as unlawful as to permit what God forbids. But mainly, of course, they had like economic concerns because slaves made up great part of the manpower in agriculture, in domestic services, and especially in the oases. So they framed their freed slaves in other institutions, like post-abolition institutions. I made like a list, Mrobin, Khamessat, and Wala, in order to profit from their labor for free without so bypassing the status of slavery. And the most important for my case studies is the third, Wala. So manumitted slaves entered a sort of patronage-client relationship where the former slave takes the lineage name of the former master, adding Shuashin or Abid to it. So that's why these people are called Abid or Ubuntu. So they kept working for the white lineage, like their counterparts, doing helping out in harvest time, for example, helping out in weddings of the white families, mainly, for example, I don't know, the makeup of the bride, doing clothes, doing musical performances, and so on. But on the other side, also slaves were willing to enter this kind of relationships because the Arab society puts a lot of value and importance on kinship and affiliation. And surviving in the Arab society without any kind of affiliation is really difficult. It means like surviving as a solo it can be even dangerous. So they were, I don't know like how many choices they had, but they entered this kind of relationship in order to create a sort of fictive kinship and to survive. However, it's a fictive kinship because these two parts are completely forbidden from getting married with each other. So it's not a real familiar tie. Let me move on. And the Abidor Buntun, so they were framed within a wala. I am trying to tracing back their histories in my doctoral thesis. It's really difficult. I think the first time I see them in documents, 1892, which is kind of late, but I don't have any other choices. And also the epithet Abid, because Shuashin and Abid are not really interchangeable. Like Abid points at a more recent origin. So I guess they were also like freed later, I don't know. They have a strict prohibition of marriages between Abid Urbuntun and Urbuntun, and the penalty is ostracism. So they like completely like taken out of the lineage, the white lineage, and they are absorbed by the black lineage. However, it's not so easy as the activists were saying. So they were saying black and white people cannot get married to each other. It's not like that. Because the Abid Urbuntun, since 25 years, started getting married with white women. How? So in general, like things were more relaxed in Tunisia. So marriages between white and black people were kind of spreading, and they started reaching out for lineages which were not Ubuntu. So they were getting married to white women who were not coming from their former master lineage. And now there are like 12 white women in the Abid Urbuntun community. They told me, of course, it was difficult to get married to an Abid Urbuntun because our families at the beginning were opposing a little bit of resistance, but mainly because they are poor. So they pay less mahar, which is the bride wealth. And our parents were also concerned about the fact that we had to live in Gosba because there is a patrilocal system like throughout North Africa. So they were afraid that their daughters would end up in situation of poverty or like However, they accepted in the end. And these people started, like these women started living in Gospa. And of course, they were producing offspring. The interesting thing is that these offspring, so the children get born to a now like black father and white mother, are nowadays racialized as white. So yeah, so they, of course, there is always a kind of concern about the fact that they are growing too black. But then from the outside and also from the Abidor-Buntun, they are completely considered as white. And I will tell you like a conversation I had. There is this woman coming from Algeria. She got married to an Abidor-Buntun 20 years ago, and she had daughters in Gospa. These daughters got married to Abidor-Buntun themselves, and these daughters were already racialized as white. They were considered white. They had offspring with an Abidor-Buntun, and their children, their babies, they're very young, they are also considered as white. However, these white girls are always putting a lot of effort in concealing their blackness when it comes out, so ironing their hair, putting some kind of makeup. And I had this conversation with this girl, Hilal, and she had her baby, it was a girl. And she said, "Do you like my baby girl?" And I said, "Yeah, she's very beautiful." "Does she look like those in Gospa?" And I said, I don't know what you mean. And the mother enters the conversation saying, "For God's sake, tell her no, no." And I said, "No, no." And Hilal, "Does she look like her father?" And I said, I've never seen the father, I don't know. And then the brother says, "The father is like that." And he points at like an intense black in a coffee pot. And I said, "I think she resembles you, especially her straight hair." And she was very happy, like, "Mom, have you heard what she's saying? She has straight hair, not curly hair." And I said, "But even with curly hair, she would be so beautiful. You don't have to like don't have to worry." And she's like, "Yeah, you see, it's not a problem." She's telling it, it's not a problem. So the first conclusion I want to draw on the community is that, so the recent possibility of getting married outside the lineage was hailed with relief. So white women are looked after by the Abidor-Buntun, especially if they're foreigners, because now there is tourism. So Jerba is very near and it's touristic. So getting married to a foreigner, like coming from Europe, means not only like ascending socially, but also having the possibility of looking for jobs and for other possibilities in Europe. However, there is still a very deep inequality between men and women within the marriage, because like Abidor-Buntun men can get married like outside, but not women. So you don't see white men in Gospa, it's impossible. And women have still key roles in building households, but acquired a new importance in the perpetration of racial continuities, meaning that now the offspring is racialized as white because the patrilineal pattern, which was prevalent in the Arab society, is diluting somehow. And I think that diluting means also that other markers are showing. And this is mainly like the phenotypical marker. So the obsession about curliness of the hair, the skin color of the babies, means that a different social markers of color is outweighing the diluted patrilineal system somehow. However, when the activists came in with their theories and with the racial framework, they were applying a very strict racial like setup, which was completely overlooking all these dynamics behind them, meaning like the trajectories of freed slave after abolition, so this kind of fictive familiar ties and so on. The possibility of getting married and like the racial mingling of the Tunisian society before 2011. So, and then they now have an enlarged matrimonial pool, often overcoming racial distinction. However, what is completely forbidden, and it has never changed, that the strict prohibition of intermarriages between Buntun and Abidor-Buntun, meaning the complete prohibition of intermarriages between former slaves and former masters. This has never changed. It's completely strict and prohibited. And this is at the basis of the Black Romeo and White Juliet. And this comes from the heritage of the Wala. So the Wala creating a fictive, familiar tie, like it narrowed the two lineages, but they went in parallel, overcoming like the post-independence period, nation building process, 2011 up to now. And these two lineages are never touching. And the last thing, as opposed then to the strict phenotype-based racialization in the US and in South Africa, the difference is that Islamic societies absorbed many Black people and inserted them into the white and thus like free society through certain institutions, so concubinage, encouragement of manumissions, patrilineal strict system, and so on. And so it led to a higher degree of métissage. However, so socio-cultural construction of Blackness survived up to today, mainly, like maybe they even acquired more importance today than before. These are like what my data are showing. I don't know if of course it's like one community, I cannot generalize it to the whole, I don't know, Muslim societies, but this is what has been also found in Morocco, for example. And this is what has also like gained importance nowadays because Black refugees are coming. So they are escaping 2011 Libya, or they are going, for example, to Morocco to try to cross to Europe through Ceuta and Melilla from West Africa. And they were hierarchized mainly by their phenotype because there was no other way of hierarchizing them by means of their slavery past because they are outsiders. And then the third thing that makes like a cleavage between the activists and the slave descendants community is the regional differences in post-abolitionist trajectories in the north, in the coast, and in the south, in the countryside. And they pursue different emancipatory trajectories, and now they translate into different racial thinking. But it's not just about race, it's also about politics, because they are trying to mobilize them with an idea of politics which is completely different from the slave descendants community. In fact, guess what the slave descendants community is voting for? Is voting for the Islamist Party of Ennahda. I mean, everything is like completely divided. Thank you. Hope I was clear. If you want to ask me a question, I'm yes.
I'm here? Oh, can I be heard now? Yeah, thank you very much. Well, my goodness, 21st century, and we're still talking about this kind of nonsense. So this is Africa, Tunisia, and this is the way that Black people are seen in that country. Is this considered an Arab country? How is it seen?
That's a good question.
Tunisia, how do they see themselves, as Arabs or whites?
That's a good question because they never define themselves resorting to color, even though they would be colored in Europe, for example. So we are speaking about Tunisians, Moroccans, they are everywhere in Europe and they are racialized as foreigners. But if you go to this country, they never define themselves with any other color apart from white. So if you ask them, what are you like compared to a Black person, they would say, I'm Bida, so I'm white, he is Black. Then, of course, the Arab and Muslim heritage was really emphasized, especially in the nation building process. But I think Tunisia has another specificity, which is the fact that their boosted identity narrows them more to Europe than to Africa. So they are not really thinking about their country as belonging to Africa. They are more, especially because of their Roman Carthaginian past, they think they belong to an area which is the Mediterranean, which is more like northward than southward. And that's also, I think, a problem in racializing others, like Blacks as others, because they are coming from down the Sahara.
I was trying to understand the word métissage. What does that mean?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know if there is a translation. It's like
Racial mixing.
Yeah.
So in this situation, it's the white male who is dominant. And the patrilineal system allows for a white male to have any female that he wants.
Yes.
But can the black male have any female other?
No.
So that's the issue between men, white men and the domination over black men.
I mean, a black man can have a black woman, that's for sure.
Oh, well, it's a black woman. But can he have a white woman?
No.
No. So, and this is based on the Islamic law, or is it based on the political laws of the land?
This has been shaped by the history, by the law, by culture. So it has many like roots. But the one of the reason why is that the concubinage was very widespread. So the Islamic slavery was in demand for women more than men. That's why they never really competed with the transatlantic and the trans-Saharan, because the Islamic slavery was in need for women, mainly for domestic chores like nannies, like cleaning ladies, but also for as concubines. And concubines were very popular. I mean, there was in some periods of Islamic slavery, even like middle class people could have concubines. It was really widespread.
But, and this is really fascinating, because as you look at the history progressively over time, and we have all these debates about our humanity, and something so fundamental as sexual dominance and sexual power, we hear about patriarchy in academic terms, but the reality is that this is white male dominance everywhere in the world, literally. And so in that part of the world, white men can have their way with any woman. And the black man, is there still, are they still practicing the issue of making black men eunuchs? Is that still being done?
Is it what? Sorry, last part?
A eunuch. You know what a eunuch is? Castration of a black male?
Yes, yeah, eunuchs. They were mainly shipped to this Turkey, like as guardians of the harem. Yeah, but like not producing offspring, they don't really count as an element in the racial mixing. But I think,
of
like,
course not. They can't produce anything, you know. So that's the whole issue. So the racial species of black male prodigies, children coming from black men, doesn't exist. It's really white men producing what seems to be children of color, who in the mixed race situation, they have are they considered Arabs or white, or how are they considered?
I mean, if the father is Arab and white and free, then the children are white, Arab, and free. Because the concept of race in the Middle East is more concerned with descendants more than with color.
Well, we can understand that, yes. Dominance plays those roles and sets the terms of who becomes what. So, but yet, this is not a problem for the United Nations and other nations of the world. We focused on what's happening in the United States, but in the Arab world, it's a way of life. And that still happens.
And it's also a very ancient concept of race. Like we are speaking about the 7th century. In the 7th century, the Arabs invaded North Africa. And since then, this system is valid. I mean, it's ongoing. So we are speaking about something way more ancient than the North Atlantic ideas of race.
Well, we can't let it happen anymore. Can't happen anymore. We won't tolerate that. So even the men over there have to be held to the same standards of accountability. We hold white people here to be responsible for their conduct and behavior, but we can't let Arabs get away with that. That's not, there's no logic in that. And it's unfortunate that the United Nations doesn't see even Trump going over there, right? Didn't seem to make that an issue about the role of women in society and the role of black people, you know, how they're seen. But we make a great issue of it here in Western civilization. And we're fighting to get this kind of equality. But yet in the Arab world, they dominate and they control and they Islam permits it. I don't understand how that is, how we can accept it in a religious context, no matter the dominance has existed for time immemorial. Well, we understand the reason for the coming of dominance. But once you're in the dominant position and you become enslaved, and your title is a slave, and so your only inheritance is that of slavery. It's a very, very fascinating discourse looking at North Africa.
I think we know little because, okay, mainly they are like, I mean, we don't get to know much about these countries anyway, apart when they are like in revolt or war. And then because there is this culture of silence, which is permeating every racial discourse. It's really a taboo, it's difficult to tackle, it's very sensitive. Yes. I think the light is not on.
Yeah, okay. So a question coming from a historian. In one part of your presentation and also in one of the slides, you talk about that blackness was overlapped with enslavability in the 17th century, in the case of Tunisia. And I would like to know more about that, about the 17th century. Why 17th century?
It's a very fascinating story because in the 17th century, the king of Morocco, Moulay Ismail, yeah, you know it. You can read Shukil Hamel's book, Black Morocco. So this king decided to create an army, a big army, and the best way to recruit people was to force them to join the army. And he decided by decree, so by law, to enslave, to recruit into the army all black people. So this is like El Hamel's argument. From then onwards, blackness meant like labor for free, meaning slavery, but also like forced recruitment and so on. So his argument is like in this period, it was really crystallized, and especially at an institutional level, because there was a decree saying all black people, whether they are free, whether they are enslaved by someone, whether they are like roaming around, whether they are trespassing and transiting, they have to be taken and brought to the army. Yeah, tell me.
But this was for the case of Morocco.
Yes.
Why do you think we can think the same for the Tunisian case?
Yeah, in fact, I mean, this racial setup is more referred to, I don't want to say the Islamic world because it's too huge, but North Africa. I'm speaking about Islamic slavery in North Africa and the racial setup in North Africa. There are many similarities. I mean, Morocco was not under the Ottoman Empire, but Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya and Egypt were, so they were under the same kind of emperor. They had some similar trajectories. Of course, there was never a Tunisian Moulay Ismail. I think it's just conventional to say that in the 17th century, it was, for the first time, it was coupled, like matched black and enslavability, because I think it has really like deeper historical roots. Like the argument is that for the first time, it was written down, but it was ongoing, completely ongoing.
But is there any like historical book that maybe helps you to fit Shukri argument about Morocco to the Tunisian case? Because Morocco was quite independent, was not part of the Ottoman Empire, but maybe something that would help you to fit this idea in the Tunisian case as similar. I don't know, just a...
Yeah, no, actually no, unfortunately. Also Morocco has many specificities because, for example, slavery was never formally abolished, never. So this is also very interesting. Then numbers of imported slaves into Morocco are not comparable to Tunisia. I mean, Tunisia is a very small country, and it was at the end of a trans-Saharan route, which was already serving Tripoli and Algiers, so it was really secondary. While Morocco was importing in a very stable way also because the trans-Saharan route leading to Morocco is also the gold route. So it has never decreased in history. It was really flourishing. So there are many specificities. Also, for example, Morocco was a great military power compared to Tunisia. Works about Tunisia, there are no works about Tunisia, but for example, a student of Paul Lovejoy, Ismail Montana, wrote a very nice book on abolition. So we are speaking about a very late phase, and it's there are no works on racial dynamics before that. But for example, all the post-delivery trajectories, Montana's book is really helpful in that, to distinguish what slaves were doing. Also because he has worked a lot on the Ottoman system of taxation. So he was able, for example, to count how many people, how many freed slaves were in certain places after abolition by looking into the records of taxation. So it was a very, it's very nice work. On racial, like in general, on Islamic, like on race in the Middle East, there are so few books. There is one of the milestone is Lewis, 1992. Then there is Bruce Hall, and that's it, practically. Up to my doctoral thesis.
Thank you so much for your inspiring presentation. And I have several questions and comments. I'm also working on Islamic slavery in the Ottoman Empire, so there are many similarities. For Ottomans, I'm mentioning the Anatolian and the Balkanic area. It was impossible for it was impossible for Ottomans to select their concubines among enslaved Africans. There is no way. They must be white. So I think it's important to highlight these differences to understand the role of race, because Anatolia and the North Africa are very close to each other. But these people in Istanbul and in Anatolia and in Balkans, it's impossible. Even not, it's also, I have never come across an exceptions. And my second comment is on this system Vala. I think this conventional literature suggests that this Vala provided something good for enslaved people and their descendants. But I think it's yes, and it's so important. You are challenging this conventional historiography because it helps them to carry the stigma of slavery, and it's, you know, this fictive kinship is just, I think, a lie. And the third and the last question, you gave this number 10 and 15. And if they are statistically non-exist, how did you find this number? Because for me, it's almost impossible to say this number. I can give some numbers, but it's just an assumption, you know. So how? That's all. Thank you.
What numbers would you say for Turkey?
We are just saying for the descendant of yes, yeah. 20,000, 25,000 between. It's
on a population on?
Yes, 75 million.
That's why, I mean, not having black concubines, but just importing eunuchs means that they were not reproducing themselves, and then it's also like less visible, I think, when you go to Turkey, that there are Afro descents. It's really. I start from the statistics. You know that, for example, in the US, to count how many people are identifying themselves as black, they ask them. So people like for example, a percentage of 13% means 13% of people refer to themselves using just one color, because other can refer to themselves using, I don't know, like I was half Asian, half, I don't know. This has never been done in the Arab world because it's taboo. There is this silencing. And 10-15% is between activists' ideas, which are completely arbitrary, and records of black people, especially in the South. So they are biased because the South is has more black people, by people like consulates by using like records of taxation. So they are completely, I mean, volatile, really. It's impossible to say. But for example, activists say that 10–15% is very low because they are also including mixed people, like as opposed to the U.S. Race Census Bureau. I don't remember how it's called. And so the first thing, of course, it's like the low import of Black women to Turkey, but the high demand from especially from the Sultan, from the palace of Black men, so castrated Black men, meant like in the end a lower percentage of Black people. The second thing is Wala. Of course, it's I mean, we have discussed it before. Like the Islamic, so the literature on Islamic slavery is always focusing on the fact that Islamic slavery was not as cruel as the transatlantic slave trade because it was domestic, so there was no plantation system, even though, for example, we know that in Egypt at a certain point when there was a civil war here in the US, Egypt was producing cotton using slaves, and producing cotton is not a very nice job. I mean, we know it. And the first thing is that, and the second is that some scholars claim that the Islamic system of slavery was less cruel because it was very absorptive of people. But still, people like slaves were manumitted in the end. They were like part of the family. There's this kind of very paternalistic discourse on Islamic slavery, but still they were like a part of the family. They were nannies, and then in the end they were manumitted, and then they were absorbed. Actually, they were absorbed, but they were absorbed with these institutions. And so it meant deprivation of, I mean, disempowerment, first of all. Then sometimes even geographical marginalization, because the Abidor Guntun are living in a place which is, of course, the least fertile land. I mean, they are like the less watered land as compared to the white lineage. And then the prohibition of intermarriages. And then professional discrimination, like economic discrimination. So of course, yes, it was, I think, a kind of discourse which was very common, especially in a period which was a nation building period. So like Turkey is the same, like let's say Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt, and Ataturk in Turkey, and Habib Bourguiba in Tunisia. We're trying to defend their nations as less, cruel, or like always like as opposed to the Western world, which was the bad one. No, so we are decolonizing. So all the guilt is like put to France and Great Britain and so on. But then there is also the thing that it's very difficult to speak about slavery with people within a religious framework. I mean, you know it. It's like if you open the Quran is completely forbidding any discrimination between people. Like there is the metaphor of all people equal like the teeth of the comb. So it's really difficult to tackle these issues. And therefore they were creating this kind of discourse which was forgiving, like forgiving for the Islamic slavery and for slave owners. Also because many slave owners were in the elite. So it was difficult for them to say, yes, we exploited the labor for free of people who are not able to create families, and now, so yeah, this is like a counter debate we have to.
Yeah, so it's, I think, important to underline, because this literature always suggesting that this Islamic slavery is benign, but I think rather than thinking about differences, we should also think about similarities.
Yeah, the happy slavery model. Yes. There is no happy slavery.
Well, Bruno started by saying, as the historian, so as the socio-legal scholar and someone interested in rights activism, I wanted to bring us up to the present. And I'm also mindful that your exchange is really similar to the description that we had about and the conversation we had about forced marriage and war.
Yeah.
That somehow if you stay together and in the end their affection develops and you have children, that somehow that makes the violence and the coercion of the relationship in war somehow benign, softer, etc. So it just was mindful of that earlier conversation we had. But in terms of the activists, are you seeing a more nuanced, a more sophisticated, a more political approach developing now, especially as you ended by saying, you know, who are those in the South going to vote for? It seems that their support is going to go behind the Islamic Party. So are you seeing a shift in contemporary Tunisia where out of necessity and sort of politics, they may actually be forced to have a more nuanced understanding of Blackness and a politics of inclusion?
It's very difficult to say. I think the divide between the Islamist party and the activists, I don't see it as bridgeable soon, not at all. But, and the Islamist party is not fighting for Blacks' rights. It's completely denied. Like they would say, yes, I mean, we experienced some kind of racism when we were young, but this is just because of poverty and ignorance. But my Islamic upbringing then led me to overcome all these things, and now I am a completely like free person. Like I am a deputy. I am successful. So from their side, no attempt is coming to overcome this problem. So they just like to propose some laws. But then the advocates for human rights, they started being less. First of all, they are very like it's a very small group. They are not, and they are very recent. So they started reaching out for other associations, mainly this association which won the Nobel Prize, and they drafted a proposal for a law, this hate crime. So we are very far from empowerment policies. This is really, but there is a draft of this law. It's been like now debated, and it's punishing like verbal and racist attitudes and insults. I don't know how much this can solve the problem. I don't know, like without a real empowerment of these people who don't have like the economic means or the education to like really to achieve social mobility. I don't think that punishing someone because he has called you monkey is really like solving the problem. But still, I see it as something already kind of revolutionary. That's people are starting speaking about it, and every time I like switch on the TV, there was some talk show about racism. People are really speaking about it, and this is already like a very big achievement. This is one of the best up to now. Let's hope so for the future.
Just a quick follow-up question. Is there any research on young people of mixed heritage and their self-identification? Because I bet, I mean, again, that's got to change at some point. That whether they don't accept a simplistic whiteness, construction of whiteness.
I think no, there are no studies, but these young people now things are changing. So I was looking at some. They were creating some social platforms in which they were discussing issues like discrimination. They are like digitally educated. They speak English perfectly. They are in touch with activists in North America. So things are in this case, yeah, things are changing. I see that sometimes. Like very embryonic, but sometimes I see a kind of black pride coming out. So people who are maybe like mixed, but they really defend their identity as black people and they're proud of it. But we are speaking about cities, we are speaking about the coast, we are speaking about people who have gone to university, we are not speaking about slave descents. And in some places, for example, in Chad, I have a colleague working in Chad and is working on a slave descendants movement, asking for reparation. We are very far from it. Also because even saying I am a slave descendant is really difficult. These people are not really defining themselves as slave descendants. They say, yes, yeah, yeah, because maybe we were doing some course in agriculture for the whites, but no, we are like, maybe we were free and it's still very embryonic. Yes.
So, sorry. No. Yes, because I'm curious about your conversation with the mother and the baby, and
Yeah.
the conversation you told us about, and the idea of prettiness and ugliness and the hair and the color. I would like to know what if you like how can you, how if you think there is a kind of thinking about this idea of prettiness and ugliness in the case of race, if you can see like an influence of Western ideas of prettiness in this case, maybe through, I don't know, television, what kind of soap operas goes to Tunisia from Europe or from I don't know, and if you think that these some of these ideas comes from like a Western side more than like something more from Tunisia itself, like a long
It's very
duration thing.
interesting. Yeah, it's very interesting because I really would like to go deeper into it, because of course if you speak about young people speaking on Facebook, there is this kind of reference to North Africa, to North America. But in certain communities, I have found a lot of ideas about chasteness, like being pure, or like sexual available, and beauty, and all these things which are connected to very deep historical phenomena, and they are so specific. I really would like to go deeper into. So for example, they say, as a Black woman, I am addressed on the street. Sometimes I'm like catcalled, and like people are coming to me. And mainly, I think it comes from the fact that there is this idea of Black women as being more sexually available, which is kind of connected to the fact that freed slaves ended up in prostitution, I think. And the idea that they are beautiful. So there is a kind of exoticism on the other side, which reminds me too much of the concubinage. I think there is a very historical connection, and nobody has tackled it, because usually they refer to North Atlantic models. It's really interesting, yeah. Then beauty, of course, like they are perceived as less, like some kind, like attractive in a sexual way, but not beautiful, not in a pure way. And so they also resort to all this kind of, I don't know if you're familiar with this whitening creams. Yeah, so all the women I was living with, they were going out, when it was sunny, they were going out completely covered. They were putting some kind of clay to make their skin whiter. They were even, before getting married, they were sitting down and eating a lot, because they had the idea that if you get fat, you get whiter, because your skin is like stretchy or something like completely unhealthy. Yeah, and then of course, all these whitening creams, which are coming from West Africa. You know that like Ivory Coast has forbidden them, like recently, because they are very dangerous actually for the skin. And then of course, all the like straightening of the hair, and this is like universal. But it's really interesting that sometimes I see some kind of historical trajectories which are really Tunisian, and I would really like to go deeper into it. Yes.
I'm impressed by the presentation, because it's very informative in terms of the present struggles that we're having within the TDSB and the prison system. And currently we're talking about anti-Black racism here in Canada. And so when we raise the argument about, you mentioned phenotype and what is race, and when we say anti-Black racism, the Minister of Government is making every effort now to define that in a way that will give Blacks the benefits, meaning Black people, whatever they are, the benefits of governmental changes, legislation that will make them, give them better sense of involvement within the society and the economy. And so my fundamental question is that we bring in a lot of people from elsewhere around the world into this society, and they enjoy these benefits. But as a Black person myself, going to Tunisia, would I be able to experience the same levels of equality that I experience here?
That's interesting, because when Western countries try to address issues like race and racism, they address them in their own terms, which is fine, because I mean, they are coming from some specific histories, but then immigration comes and overlaps with it. So people coming from the Arab world or from Africa, they are coming with their own ideas of race, their constructions, and they are injecting it into the society. And I see many clashes like happening also in Europe nowadays. Like, for example, there is a lot of debate about racism against Arabs, but then Arabs are in turn racist against other immigrants because they're black. So it's, I don't know, it's very difficult to put them in a category and say, okay, let's sit down and speak about racism and do something concrete about it. And then for the thing that coming to like you going to Tunisia, I have followed another very interesting phenomenon, which is the, when Zine El Abidine Ben Ali privatized a lot, like opened a lot economically, a lot of banks from Sub-Saharan Africa came, especially from West Africa, but also like South Africa, the African Bank and so on. And so for the first time, Tunisia saw these people arriving who were black and very rich. And they settled like in the outskirts of Tunis, in Carthage, in these very fancy places. And they were like confused. And once, it was very funny for me because I was in the World Social Forum, and there was this activist saying, yeah, because like racism and so on, she was lecturing. And the guy coming from South Africa, a bank, he was working in a bank, he stood up and said, but I mean, if you Black Tunisians are suffering so much, why don't you come back? She said, where should I come back? I mean, I'm a Black Tunisian. I was born here. I don't know any other languages. I don't know any other places. So these ideas of race are really clashing nowadays. It's really interesting to see it. But of course, I mean, they are hierarchized higher because money kind of makes you whiter, like you always.
So do you see the possibility of any kind of equity and justice coming to the Black person in the world within your lifetime?
I don't know.
You don't know.
Things are changing, and things are changing very fast because the world is very interconnected. So I think there is hope.
Yes.
It's not easy, but I'm not the person who can say.
Good luck in your research and the
Thank
work
you.
you're doing. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me.